In Canada, one woman is killed in a violent act every other day. The spike in domestic violence that began during the pandemic is still on the rise. Numbers in Canada have leapt by 27% since 2019, and in Israel, the situation is just as critical, with 16 Israeli women already murdered this year. True to its mission, CHW is stepping up to support emergency services in Canada and Israel at this critical time. Help CHW empower victims of domestic violence by supporting the 27-hour SOS crowdfunding campaign. From August 22nd to 23rd, every dollar will be quadrupled when you donate online at chwsos.ca.
I come from an athlete family in Damascus, Syria. My sister Yusra and I grew up in a swimming pool. In 2015, the pool is bombed, and we flee the war.
That's the trailer for long-distance swimmer Sarah Mardini, a new documentary by filmmaker Charly Wai Feldman. The Canadian director spent 4 years following Mardini, a Syrian refugee and Olympic athlete who became famous after hopping out of a boat in the middle of the Aegean Sea to help pull everyone on board to Greece. Wai Feldman has made a career out of telling dramatic true stories from around the world, and it is fitting since she herself has a global identity. With a Chinese mother and a Jewish father, she was raised in Jamaica, Vietnam, and Montreal, and now splits her time between Canada and the United Kingdom. What has underpinned it all, she says, is her Judaism, something that has given her a borderless identity.
You know, I had a Canadian passport, but that didn't mean much. I had this French school, which was like a weird relationship, Vietnam, where I would never become, they don't allow citizenship or whatever for no matter how long you've lived in the country. So I guess Judaism gave me this like borderless identity that I could dive into. And the whole principle of learning how to exist as a diaspora and being able to exist as a diaspora was just hit home for me at a time where I was looking for that sense of belonging.
I'm Rivka Campbell, host of Rivkush, the CJN podcast spotlighting incredible Jews of color. I'm filling in for Ellen Besner today. And this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Wednesday, August 23rd, 2023. Welcome to the CJN Daily, sponsored by Metropia. This past spring, Charly Wai Feldman's latest film debuted at the Hot Docs Festival in Toronto. I was able to sit down with her for a lengthy, fascinating conversation about her cultural identity, her new film, and what it's like growing up Jewish in Vietnam. Like how any Jew who visited was told they had to visit the Feldmans in Hanoi. Have a listen.
Beth David Hebrew School is now accepting new students. One of Toronto's most dynamic, egalitarian, conservative congregations is offering personalized Hebrew lessons, hands-on learning, exciting field trips, and small group activities, all with a hot dinner included. This is Jewish exploration that will last your children a lifetime. Classes run weekly on Monday nights from 5 to 7:15 p.m., starting September 18th. To learn more and enroll, visit bethdavid.com or email Adina, that's ADINA, at bethdavid.com.
So tell me about you, because off camera, if you will, off mic, if you will, we started discussing, because I had asked Charly how to pronounce her name, and go ahead and tell the story about the pronunciation of your name and a little bit about your background growing up.
Great. So thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here. And it's just one of those identities that gets it's a little confusing to talk about in a casual conversation. So it's kind of nice to be in a space where we can actually focus on that and just be among peers who also feel similar things. So I'm very excited to be here. I was born in Montreal. My father's Jewish Canadian. My mother is from Hong Kong, converted before we were born so that, the family would be okay with the whole intermarriage thing. At that time, we're talking about late 80s, Vietnam started to open up to non-Americans. So Canadians, Australians, all of that started to travel there as seeing an opportunity before Americans could come. And so we kind of landed there. My parents separated and we ended up being raised by my father in Vietnam, going to a French lycée, which, you know, for those not familiar, like the French lycée is bent on assimilating whoever's there. So by the time I was 18 years old, we were, you know, I felt French for some
Wow.
strange reason that baffles me to this day.
Wow.
But yeah, and as I was saying to Rivka, like to you, Rivka, my Chinese side is like still a bit of an enigma to me. Like I don't speak Chinese. I identify strongly with Hong Kong and the struggles it's been through over the past few years, but I don't have the same tie, I would say, to my Cantonese side as I have to my Jewish side.
This is your background is so cool. So tell me a little bit more about, because you articulated that the Judaism is very important to you and is, you know, part of obviously of who you are. So how does that manifest itself? And did you find that you had any, because speaking for myself, sometimes there's been struggles around me presenting as I do, my children presenting as they do, because they're also, I like to say, Heinz 57, a mixed bag of everything and then some. And, you know, and really navigating the community and who I am in terms of how I fit in. So tell me, do you share any of that? Would you like to elaborate a bit?
Definitely. I mean, when I heard about this podcast, I was so excited because one of my projects has been dream projects has been to publish a book with just photos being like Jewish in 2023, you know, like, or whatever year, but just like, this is what we look like, you know?
Yeah, do it.
But I remember, because I mean, I grew up in a Jewish diaspora community and very much, you know, I would dip into the Montreal Jewish community, which is very tight knit. But, you know, in Vietnam, it was a kind of mishmash of like Jewish people from around the world. We were maybe a total of 40 people who would get together during high holidays.
That's more than I would have thought.
Yeah. I mean, you had a lot of Israeli travelers who would join in and things like that. But there were, I mean, I grew up with like maybe 2 other Jewish kids who went to a different international school, and kind of dipped in and out. But I remember going to a Passover Seder in Singapore, and it was the first time I was introducing my husband to what Passover was, and he was very nervous, and we walk up, and there's a sort of bodyguard outside, and he's like, "What are you doing here?" And we're like, "Well, we're here for Passover." And he looks at us, and he's like, "Are you Jewish?" And I'm like, "Yes, I am." It's like, "Where are you from?" "Montreal." "Where in Montreal?" "Côte-Saint-Luc."
Oh,
And of course you say Côte-Saint-Luc, and like he immediately was like, okay, that's legit. But you know, you have to go through these rounds of testing, and that kind of angst of like walking up to a kind of Jewish community diaspora event anywhere around the world. I always have this angst of like, oh, I'm gonna have to go through those those hoops, that challenge again, you know, like, and that's really frustrating. And I think that it's become like a sort of cause for me to, you know, I tell my husband that is what I want to give my children, is the confidence to walk into a Jewish community without feeling like they are other.
Oh, I just got a chill when you were saying that.
Yeah.
Because I felt like I was standing right next to you.
Yeah.
And that feeling, I'm telling you, I work in the Jewish community. I'm often, and it still doesn't go away. It doesn't even go away when I come to my own place.
Yeah.
My own place of employment. I still, in my little bubble of the office, it's cool. It's when I have to go to a bigger event, I still have that feeling of, okay, who's going to ask me something?
Yeah.
Because I find, I don't know if you feel this way too. Sometimes people are always testing me on my Judaism. You know, does she really know these things? And I'm thinking to myself, you probably don't know it. So you don't even know if I'm giving you the right answer or not. You know?
Totally.
So do you find that sometimes?
Yeah, definitely. And also because I didn't go to Hebrew school growing up, and I do have that insecurity. Oh, I don't know all these things, but like I spend time with my cousins who did go to Hebrew school and my family and in Montreal, and I love spending time with them. But I noticed that for some reason, maybe because I felt that insecurity, I've just engaged with a lot of these things really, really deeply in a very international context. And when I go to some events sometimes, it's very like, let's go through the motions. And it's not necessarily like, let's like, let's engage with it, let's question it, let's this,
Right.
the thing I'll get is like, oh, why are you being so deep about it? Why are you being so like intense about it? But I'm like, I guess I had to engage with it to find
Right.
myself in some of this. And when you asked earlier, like, what was my relationship with it growing up, is like, I had a Canadian passport, but that didn't mean much. I had this French school, which was like a weird relationship. Vietnam, where I would never become, they don't allow citizenship or whatever for no matter how long you've lived in the country. So,
I did not know that.
Yeah, you're always going to be a foreigner in Vietnam unless you are Vietnamese. And so I guess Judaism gave me this like borderless identity that I could dive into. And the whole principle of learning how to exist as a diaspora and being able to exist as a diaspora was just hit home for me at a time where I was looking for that sense of belonging.
So let's talk a little bit about your work.
Yes.
So I do want to talk about, you said in over 20 countries. Please explain that.
Yeah, I don't know what happened in my 20s, I guess, because I partnered with this production company that was just starting, and they were doing a lot of global films. And I just kind of was very, a very yes woman at that time. We've got this project in Nepal. Yes. We've got this thing in Myanmar. Sure. We've got this thing in China. Okay. Like, can you go film in Guatemala? Okay. No problem.
Wow.
And so it just kind of happened that there was a point where I realized I was subletting my apartment for longer than I was actually living there.
Living in it.
And I just said, you know what, I'm giving up the apartment, or the room in the apartment, because it was London. And I just lived out of a suitcase. And so after a few years of just like traveling around like that, I just spent another 4 years living out of a suitcase. I was dealing with a lot of like heavy subject matter, a lot of
Such
trauma.
as?
Like human trafficking, women like selling brides between Vietnam and China. The earthquake in Nepal in 2014,
Right.
The Myanmar elections, which that was a bit less traumatic.
How do you cope with that? Because while people can say, well, this is what she does, she's a professional, blah, 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 but you are hearing and seeing tragedy and recording it for history. But how does that affect you, Charly, as a person? Like,
it was definitely, it took its toll on me. And I kind of operated on this rhythm of like overwork, burnout. And then I finally decided to slow things down a bit. And that's when I started the last documentary, which was just out at Hot Docs, where I met your colleague, Michael.
So that's a nice segue. I don't know the story.
Mm-hmm.
So please tell me the genesis of this documentary and who she is and why. What led you to do this?
So the genesis for me was hearing that a 23-year-old volunteer on the shores of Europe had been arrested and accused of human trafficking, money laundering, being a spy, and could face 20 years in prison. So I sort of looked at this and I thought, what is going on? This is crazy. And then my producers actually knew Sarah Mardini and her story before she got arrested. So Sarah Mardini has this incredible backstory. She was a champion swimmer in Syria, along with her younger sister, Yusra. And the two of them were coached by their father to kind of compete in the Middle East, mostly at the time. And when the war kind of really hit close to home for them, they decided to escape. And during their escape, during the crossing from Turkey to Greece, the boat that they were on, like an inflatable dinghy, started to sink. And as it was sinking, they had no choice. They jumped into the water and they swam for 3.5 hours to keep the boat afloat and to kind of keep steering it in the right direction. So they became incredibly famous for this story. They became probably the most famous refugees in Europe at the time. They made it safely to Germany, and their story went viral and has since been made into a Netflix film called The Swimmers. And so that is the dramatized, like the fictionalized version of their backstory. What was even more incredible is after doing this, the younger sister, Yusra, decided to continue swimming, and she got into the very first refugee Olympic team and competed both in Rio in 2016 and in Tokyo in what became 2021. And so that is also part of this fiction film, which is obviously a very feel-good film about these two incredible sisters. Sarah could no longer compete. She was the older sister. She could no longer compete. And she was injured from her crossing, and she decided, okay, I'm going to go back to the shores of Europe, and I'm going to help people who are making the same crossing I made. And I'm going to be an Arabic translator, a rescue swimmer, and just give blankets and water on the shoreline. And she was doing this when she got arrested. And so at the time when I got involved, Sarah Mardini was in prison. And it was like, we didn't know how long she'd be held for. We thought, what the hell? How could she be accused of human trafficking and all these things? And very quickly, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International looked into it and said, this is bogus. This is part of a political, trend to call volunteers criminals in an attempt to discourage people from volunteering, in an attempt to discourage people from coming because they may think that volunteers will help them on the other side.
Wow.
This is all like the long story. I can give the shorter version of this.
No, I'm like, you've drawn me in. Okay, like, cool. I'm just like, holy cow.
Yeah. So Sarah was arrested along with another volunteer, Sean Binder. And they, after 3.5 months and a lot of sort of pressure from the, outside world, they were released, but they were only released on bail. And at this point, I meet Sarah in person, and I'm super moved by her. She's like this incredibly charismatic, intense, like young woman. She was 23 at the time. Had lived many lives and sort of had this attitude of like, bring it on.
Wow.
And not only bring it on, but also like, she had escaped the war. She couldn't swim anymore. She almost drowned. She couldn't swim anymore. She went back to volunteer. She was arrested, and she was just like, my spirit will not be affected by this.
Clearly, yeah, she will not be crushed.
Yeah, exactly. And wow. So I just realized I want to spend more time getting to know her, and I actually want this film to be as much about the political, trend that was going on, because that's important, but very much about what this young woman was going through at this point in her life, and also to give her that, to make it a collaboration as much as possible, to kind of make it in her voice, raw and as unfiltered as, whatever we could do to kind of bring out different parts of her story that she felt hadn't been told before, because she had done a lot of public speaking about it before. So it was kind of like, why am I making her repeat something that everybody knows is out there? And there's a Netflix film. That was why we kind of needed the creative space and the time to really tell the story the way we wanted to do it justice and to do her journey justice. So we went the independent route for this film and really gave it the time that it needed.
Yeah, because it was 4 years.
Yeah.
4.5 years, which did sound like an extraordinary amount of time, but I understand just by what you said why it was.
Yeah. We didn't know where the story was going, and initially we thought, they're out on bail and they're waiting for a trial, so maybe in a year we'll have a trial and the film will be over, or in 2 years we'll have a trial. Mm-hmm. So we kept coming up with these schedules according to when this trial would happen. And then as time progressed, we just realized that trial's not coming. And if it is coming, which it did at the end of the film, all right, it's not really a trial. It's just further delaying justice.
So this has been released, correct?
Yes. It's doing its festival circuit at the moment.
Well, you need to keep me posted on it.
Definitely.
Thank you so much for being a guest on this podcast. If you want to hear the full conversation, search for Rivkush wherever you listen to podcasts, or visit the cjn.ca/Rivkush. And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily, sponsored by Metropia, Integrity, Community, Quality, and Customer Care. Thanks for listening.
Jewish comedy legend Modi and Hasidic rapper Nissim Black are coming to Toronto to perform live at UJA's campaign launch on September 7th. Visit jewishtoronto.com to get your tickets today. Don't miss Modi and Nissim Black on September 7th. Go to jewishtoronto.com for your ticket today.